Today I'm doing something I don't often do, and that's participating in a release hop. You know that Catherine Fuller Designs is one of my go-to companies, especially for inks and dyes, and today's release is filled with lots of new goodies, including some new inks. And there's a $100 gift card up for grabs to one person who hops and comments along the hop. All the details and the link to the next video are in the description below. I hope you like the new products, but as always, you can try these card techniques with items you already have. Let's get started. My favorite part of this release is the new Eternal Flame cover plate die. What a beauty! And like so many of Catherine's amazing cover plates, this works beautifully at Christmas, but it can also really work at any time of the year. I love the look of inlaid die cuts and I enjoy the process, but even for me, there's a lot of little pieces to inlay. So I'm going to use a faux inlay technique to try and get the look of light coming from a dark screen. I started by embossing a piece of white cardstock with the die. To do this, you just need to use a sandwich that includes a rubber embossing mat to prevent the die from cutting through the cardstock. And this is pretty on its own, just in white, but I'm going to add some color to the embossed panel and then layer it up with a die cut panel so that the color shows through. I started by putting some limoncello in the center of each little flower pattern, pushing it out along the little flames, but not right to the end. It's easy to see the pattern and follow along, and it really doesn't take a lot of precision. Next, I added some Tiki torch right to the centers. I didn't bring it out as far as I did with the limoncello. This panel is starting to look like a hot mess, and it's going to get worse before it gets better. By having the pattern embossed and visible like this, I can see where I want to add my ink so that I get a more consistent look on each of the elements in the pattern. To soften the look a bit, I came in and filled in the rest of the white panel with some buttercream ink. Next, to add a little shimmer, I lightly went over the panel with the new gold ink. This pigment ink can be quite heavy, so I tried to be really careful and use a light hand. I didn't want to change the color so much as just to add a little sparkle. Using pigment ink is quite different from Catherine's dye inks, and I can see it's going to take some practice for me to get really comfortable with it. So in today's video, I used it in what I'm going to call low-risk ways, just trying it out and figuring out how it works in different applications. So now for the top part. I really want this to look like a dark screen with openings, but I figured that the centers where the light is leaking out, they would glow a little brighter. So I started by putting Fiesta Blue down there. This whole thing is a bit out of my comfort zone. You know I love crisp white and bright colors, but these metallics really put me in a whole different frame of mind, and you'll see that in today's cards. Once I had all the Fiesta in the pattern centers, I carefully came back in with a narrow blending brush to add juniper mist just to the outlines. When I'm blending or coloring, I like to use this turntable with a grip mat on top. It holds the cardstock in place and allows me to turn the cardstock easily to a place where I feel most comfortable with my blending. Since I was filling in a grid really, I followed down each diagonal line in one direction and then came back and did the other. Finally, I went back over with some Fiesta Blue. I can see that my coverage isn't perfect, but I think that's going to be consistent with the flickering light seeping out through a dark screen and casting shadows and highlights. Next, I used liquid glue all over the back of the blue die cut panel. You could use an adhesive sheet if you prefer, but I like the forgivability that the liquid glue offers when I place the one panel over the other. Once you get it there, it kind of clicks into place with those raised areas fitting into the holes on the top layer. And you don't have to do this next step, but I ran the two panels through my die cutting machine with just plates, no dies, to really get them stuck together and kind of flatten it all out. And now it pretty much looks like I took each one of those pieces, colored them, and inlaid them back into the cover plate die cut. But this way is so much faster and easier. I created a juniper mist mat for my flame panel, and while the ink was still wet, I blended some of the new metallic gold ink over top. This gave me kind of a subtle, almost dull shimmer, which goes well with the rustic look of this card. For my sentiment panel, I cut a scallop rectangle, and I edged it with the limoncello, and then brought some buttercream further than the limoncello, but still leaving the center white as kind of a highlight. And then just as I was about to stamp my sentiment, I realized I wanted to blend some gold around it as well, to make it a good match with my background panel. Then I came back and stamped the sentiment from the new Warm and Bright stamp set with juniper mist ink. It stamped really crisply over the ink already on the rectangle. I added the whole panel to a white card base to finish it off. Next, I thought I would try using the new metallic inks on my gel plate. I pushed down some of the silver at the top and I lifted it up. I got a subtle result, so I put more silver down, plus some of the champagne at the bottom, and I pulled that up as well, getting lots of pretty shimmer with very subtle changes in color. I kept adding layers to the silver and champagne, finally came back in with the gold in the center of my gel plate. After a few layers of all of that, I figured that was as much as I was going to get. As I say, the color's pretty subtle, but the shimmer is just beautiful. I trimmed down the panel into two parts, one to use as a panel on my card, and I cut some of the Snow Mini flakes from the other piece. So I have a panel that's champagne and gold, and some silvery gold snowflakes. They'll look really pretty together. I decided to arrange them kind of on one side of the panel and stamp the other sentiment from the Warm and Bright stamp set. This one's about peace and love. I stamped it with over coffee ink, and I wasn't sure how it would go over top of the metallic ink, but it was crisp, and once it dried, it didn't smudge at all. I arranged my snowflakes, and then I felt a need for a little pop of festive color. I cut one of the largest scallop rectangles, and I added some rouge ink to the edges to create my mat. And again, while it was wet, I came in and blended some of the gold ink over top. This toned down the red color quite a bit, and it gave a really rustic feel, so to finish this one, I put it onto a craft card base. Next, I tried another gel print idea. I put all three inks down on the gel plate at once, brayered them out, and then put down a die cut of that Eternal Flame cover plate. I put it face down, hoping to get a 2-for-1, and then I placed another piece of cardstock on top to remove the ink from the holes of my homemade stencil. I got a faint pattern on the paper and not much ink on the die cut stencil, but I was still hopeful for the pull on the black cardstock, which is something I haven't done before. Nope. But experimenting is what trying something new is all about. So I added some more ink, brayered it out again, added the stencil, and this time I used the black cardstock to pull up the ink from the holes in the stencil. I pressed hard and even brayered it, and in the end I got a really pretty result. You might be able to get a similar result by blending the ink through the stencil and the black cardstock with a blending brush or foam, but I'm really happy with this. The layer of ink is thin enough that it dried quickly and stayed crisp. For my sentiment, I used that Warm and Bright stamp again, with blackjack ink this time, and this time I cut it with one of the double-duty circle dies, which has a pretty stitching detail on the edges. Then I used the little branch and berry stamps from the set to add some festive pops of color and fill in the top and bottom of the circle a bit. For this card, I created a purely silver on white mat, and I think it gives such a pretty brushed look to the cardstock. For my next card, I thought it would be fun to use one of those tiny stamps from the set. It's a candle, but its slightly wonky shape made me think it would create a fun background. I got out 4 colors of ink, Terracotta, Eucalyptus, Rouge, and Skylight, and I put the stamp on a small block. I had a baby wipe at the top of my panel for quick cleanup between stamping, and I just stamped them in order, turning the stamp with each impression to get a variety not only in color, but also in position. I didn't worry too much about precision, I just eyed it and tried to keep it from getting it too far from straight. I love that the little pattern in the candle almost looks like a bow, and they started to look like presents to me. Once the background was done, I thought I could color the bow in each present with buttercream ink, and I turned the stamp over on my block to get a solid impression. Pretty clever, right? Well, because the back of the stamp is slightly wider than the front, and because my presents are so close together, I wasn't leaving any white space between them, and it didn't take me long to figure out it would be faster to just swink the buttercream ink over top of the whole thing. Buttercream always freaks me out a little at first. It's so yellow when it's wet, but when it dries back, it's a beautiful warm cream color. This time I created a terracotta mat for my card, and I added champagne blending. Next, I stamped my sentiment and the large lamppost onto some cardstock I had already inked with buttercream ink. I used s'mores ink, which is super dark, and then I used the matching die cuts to cut them out. The lamppost die actually cuts holes in the lamp, but I wanted mine to be solid so the background won't show through, so I just taped those pieces in place from the back to hold them in place. To add a glow to my lamp, I added some limoncello ink to the lamp itself, but also in the background. To make the lamp and sentiment stand out a bit more, I stacked them up with 2 more die cuts under each. I hope you enjoyed seeing all these cards come together. Remember to comment and then use the link below to hop to the next video for a chance to win. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.